Questions?
Well, we just have a few minutes, but if people are able to stay, perhaps we could do a few questions. What we'd like to do is if you do have a question, we want to prioritize students who are not able to come to the lunchtime workshop. So we want to make sure that you get a chance to ask your questions. And we would also like to have people come up to the microphone so that we can hear what your question is. So, anyone? If you are, we'll give students like 10 seconds to get their thoughts together, and then we're going to open it up to everyone.
Well, can I pose a question to the students?
Sure.
Well, as folklore students and archivists, people that are interested in this type of thing, what can you tell us about the project? How can we improve it? What should we be looking for? What do we need to be doing that maybe we're not doing?
Tough crowd.
Chris, do you have any thoughts back there?
None of these that are like fully developed. I do like the methodology and the way you're going through looking for new scouting. That's something a lot of people would think of. Yeah, I don't know. I'll look at something that would be ready.
Okay.
Let's just
Yes,
say,
we've got a question back there.
I wouldn't mind hearing more about how exactly you go about collecting bootlegs and finding sort of amateur recorded newspapers from that period.
Well, I think we can all speak to that, but I think the first step that we undertake is figuring out who the other band members were, finding them and asking them. If that completely fails, but that rarely does, then it's sky's the limit. You know, wherever they may turn up, that's where we find them.
one thing I can add to this, Andrew and I actually met 24, 23 years ago through the bootleg cassette trading circles. We were introduced to each other because we were both fans of a...
Anybody remember Net News?
Well,
In Net News groups, there was in the 90s, there's news groups. They're like rec music, Dylan. You know, if you're a Bob Dylan fan, you could post from your computer some tidbit about what you wanted to know about the band. You know, maybe you found out something. Maybe there's a new review in Rolling Stone you wanted to point them to, or whatever, and you could make a posting, and then other people could respond to that either by sending a message to your email account or another post.
people also took ads out in the back of Goldmine magazine, publications like that saying, hey, live recordings available, ripe for interest. We met because we were both fans of a group called Crispy Ambulance, who were a Factory Records band, were friends with Joy Division, and we were connected by a mutual friend.
Mm-hmm.
And we also found out we were way into Perubu, mirrors, styrenes. And so I found through one of these networks a guy named Jim Ellis, who used to publish Clee magazine, and also Jim Jones, who was the late guitar player of Perubu, just by someone, David Thomas. I wrote him a fan letter, and he says, if you're looking for tapes, why don't you write Jim? So Jim, both of the Jims ended up sending me Peter Lochner recordings. And some people would say, oh, I don't have that, but I do have this. So it sort of grew from that, and then just him and I, honestly, looking for more people. I mean, I used to open the phone book and Cleveland phone book and say, oh, who's this guy? I'm going to call this guy. That's how I met Tom Herman. You know, and I just relentlessly pursue stuff, mostly for trade bait.
I will add two comments, and that is we don't ever really use social media to find recordings. So I don't recall that we've ever posted on Facebook or any other social media platforms that, hey, if you have some Peter Lochner recordings, get in touch with us. But we do use social media to find people.
And they often have tapes.
Yeah.
And we always ask that question of anybody we interview, do you have any recordings?
And I had a second comment regarding that, and now I don't know.
And
I have
just
no
destroyed
idea
it.
what it is. Yeah.
I'm useless.
Yes, Joy?
This is great. Well, you know, folklorists, our ears prick up when you use a word like legendary, which you've been using over and over. And I'm interested how that connects to the idea of influence, that, you know, bands grow out of other bands, and that everybody is looking back in this kind of lineage to Lochner. And I think it would be really interesting to look at your interviews and see, are there sort of standard Peter stories? And one way that that might happen is that, you know, these are anecdotes about Peter, who does the same kind of thing, the same kind of thing happens. But they could also be stories about, you know, I was young and I went to hear this band and
Yes.
this amazing thing happened. You know, it could be about the person and how inspiration strikes. And so, you know, what does it mean to be legendary, and how does it connect to those experiences people have that sort of push them towards making their own band?
That points to a challenge that we have, and Nick had mentioned it during our presentation, of finding people who weren't necessarily involved in the Black Orchid Society, but just like to go out and see music. And what was their story? What did they witness, and what did they feel or think about it? That's been a bit of a challenge for us.
Because I think also there are a lot of folks who may not think they have a story to tell. And there are members who say, I can't remember anything. But as you jog the memories, and this is one of the things we decided to do in the timeline, was also include relevant concerts that we knew people had gone to. And it came up in conversation with Tom Herman. Tom Herman, who was in several Peter's bands, including Perubu and Peter and the Wolves, is that there was the Yardbirds, Blue Cheer, and Traffic all appeared on the same bill in Cleveland in 1968 at the WHK Auditorium. And this was a show that we were like, Peter must have gone to this show. But I was talking to Tom Herman, he goes, oh, you know, I saw the Yardbirds in 68, and I go, did you see him with Traffic and Blue Cheer? And he goes, yes! And blank, blank, blank also went too. And it becomes this dialogue of finding out these points, but it also helps them frame the memory in time. Oh, I know it couldn't have been them because I saw them at that show, but I didn't see that show. And so you're also using cultural, if you will, signposts to mark the time, because a lot of times people's timelines are so screwed up that they're not even sure when things happen, of course, but that's what we're here for.
Just a follow-up, you know, not to do group interviews.
Right.
Get a bunch
No,
of
no.
friends from the same cohort together, just get them reminiscing about their youth and kind of wait for this to happen. I was thinking about that Goulardi Festival, which I guess is happening now as a semi-regular event.
Yes.
You know, you get people, you know, you go around with a tape recorder at a Peter festival, and you kind of let everybody help each other's memories.
Well, the other interesting thing about Goulardi is that, and Cleveland and music, is that underground music in many scenes grows out of some other previous music tradition. In Cleveland, that wasn't necessarily true. It's the only place that I know of, and I grew up there, where an underground music scene grew out of a monster movie hosted program, television program. And that is incredibly unique, but also lends a certain flavor to music in Cleveland that doesn't exist anywhere else.
Now we've got questions. So Barry, and then Daniil, and then Chris.
My question sort of follows up on Dory's, and it's sort of, and it refers back to your slide about fixing inaccuracies, because Halen's stuff is filled with inaccuracies, because all he does
Bless
is
you,
record
Barry.
what people value,
Yeah.
and he doesn't double check it, and he just prints it.
Yeah.
You did
But
what,
there's
3
also a kind
interviews
of
for
value there. There's also a kind of value there, which speaks to the notion of a legend. Legends also like circulate by people telling stories that may or may not be accurate, but those stories have meaning and power
They often
too.
get embellished as they get retold, too.
Yeah.
But sadly, Barry, the thing we did run in with one guy was that the false story became the reality for him, because he couldn't actually remember it. But so we have to cite the other, say, band members and saying, oh no, they said you never played there, and he goes, okay, well maybe I'm wrong, but it says it in the book, and I can't remember that night. I can't remember that entire year.
But we
Do you want to
but
really?
see, we've made
It's
that.
also that there's double value.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
There's the
Yes.
value of the accurate story, and there's the value of the legend.
I can
Right.
give you a really, really extreme example of how that progresses, okay? Which, one of the famous shows in Cleveland was called Extermination Night. There are actually 2 Extermination Nights in December of '74 and one in January of '75.
Craig Bell was at both
With
of them.
Mirrors, Electric Eels, and Rocket from the Tombs, okay? And at least one of these shows, the Electric Eels ended pretty much the entire night of shows by running a lawnmower across the stage and cutting up a bunch of cables. Well, in '76 or so, they did Cream published a long story feature with Kiss magazine, or Kiss the band. It's not written by Peter, it's written by somebody else, who they were telling a story about this unnamed Cleveland band is allegedly trying to, as part of their stage show, shave a dog with a lawnmower.
Right. And if I can add to that, I met another guy who said, yeah, I was there, and what they won't tell you is they couldn't get the lawnmower started. I know, I was there. So if you do the Rochamont effect, and Craig wants to add to this, if you do the Rochamont effect, somewhere in between these stories,
Is the truth.
it was a Dodge Dart, right?
Yeah.
No.
Actually, I learned something new about that whole lawnmower thing here recently because I'm playing with a band right now with John Morton from the Eagles.
Yeah.
And he tells me that they tried to start the lawnmower before the gig and it wouldn't start.
Right.
And they were happy about that. Because they didn't want Davey starting the lawnmower.
Yeah. Well,
Because they didn't know what would happen.
it is the only known lawnmower solo in the history of rock and roll. Yes.
Although Faust probably came pretty close with
Yeah.
And
pinball
Beck,
machines
too,
and
with
stuff.
Yeah.
a leaf blower.
But tracing that narrative is something that interests us. We're interested in how does that where did it start? How did it get added to along the way, and where is it now? And then what can we do to correct it?
And like I said, that Cream interview, they had like about 2 whole paragraphs that were kind of speculating just how messy a scene that got to be. But completely off the wall.
In my one conversation I had with Charlotte is what I call is in reference to the Kurosawa film Rashomon, where you get 4 different perspectives of the same event. You know, somewhere in between everybody's memories is what really happened. But the presenting all the various stories rather than, say, making a decision about what you choose to prepare, choose to present, I think I feel is a much more interesting way, and thankfully Andrew and Frank agree with me. Not everybody feels that way, Barry. I don't know how you feel about it, but Please Kill Me, which is an oral history of the New York punk scene, does a wonderful version of this, as does We Got the Neutron Bomb, which is a version of the LA punk scene. Again, everybody tells their stories.
To me also, this is just an example of maybe how an urban myth gets formed and how it develops over time and how it morphs into maybe something else. And to me, that's interesting, and I like to research that stuff, and I think we've found some interesting stories that way.
Oh, yeah, and they keep coming.
Yep. I just wondered, because you're interested in the ways that information circulated before the internet, if you looked at any of the vendor books, especially in the news system over the last 50 years. There's a lot of, I've just been looking at some from this archivist and historians who have been especially concerned with sort of the ironies of archiving zine material, which is intended to be ephemeral to start with, right? And so some of their work on that, they have specifically, there's one book called The Archival Transcendence and Outrageous Order, and there's another one in a book called Perspectives on Movie Archives that are really helpful in looking at sort of how these work and how they're being used now by people who have this nostalgic sort of turn towards the past as well. So I don't know if you want to comment at all about sort of the ironies of archiving and things like that.
I could say that too, because I remember one thing that does come up is that there's worries of, in that time period, especially we're talking about late 80s to the early 90s, right before the internet becomes a thing, there's a lot of worry of lost history, because sometimes these zines, and because I'm very familiar with the 2 research books on it by Vail and Juno, also that a lot of times these zines didn't go very far past the person who was creating them, and sometimes there's crucial stuff, interviews in there, that don't appear anywhere else, that unless you know who put out the zine, or even that it exists, you may never even know about it. I work in a record store in Boston, and I found an extensive interview with DNA and Tim Wright talking about his days in Peru, in a pile of very moldy free weekly papers, one of which was a zine that was just shoved into another one. But I never had even heard of it, would never have known about it if it hadn't fallen out of the one I was reading. And this is why I say about accidental, and it's, if anyone, this is, I think, a crucial thing, because it is a crucial history, especially within regards to the feminist scenes, and getting them, trying to put them all together so you don't miss, you're always worried about you're going to miss one.
Well, I found out about Star through sheer luck.
Right.
You know, I knew about the Zeppelin and Exit that Peter wrote for, as well as Cream. They were mentioned in Peter's obituaries, you know, that Jane Scott wrote for the Plain Dealer, that he wrote for these magazines. But I went and talked to a guy who he runs a bookstore. His name is Mark Stevie. Runs the old Erie Street bookstore in Cleveland. I knew him from before, and started talking to him. And he said, "Oh, I remember Peter coming to editorial meetings at the Star." I'm like, "What's the Star?" "It's the Star, the Free Stars." And so I ended up going to the Cleveland Public Library. They had like the last 6 issues of the first year on microfilm, and I saw that there was his byline there. You know, so that led me to that source. You know, but if I hadn't talked to Mark, you know, I don't know. You know, maybe I still wouldn't know about the Star. Other than I guess we did have a few pieces that were photographed that you picked up somewhere, but.
Well, one thing I'm happy to report, though, is that there really was a great diversity of expression within the Black Orchid Society. There's a number of very important, in my mind, women artists who were part of it. Beyond Charlotte, there were others. And their contributions to the Black Orchid Society and the things that got done are completely valuable. And their contributions to the project today are completely valuable, and I'm so happy that even Charlotte, who unfortunately we were hoping she could join us here today, but her teaching schedule did not allow, her contributions to not only the Black Orchid Society, she was a founder, but to our project many years later are just priceless.
Like I said, her essay, "Those Were Different Times," is generally regarded as really the kind of like the definitive statement of that period, although it's only like the first part of a projected 3-part series, and it only goes up to about the end of 72. And, you know, that's really its biggest problem is that, you know, it stops fairly early. And she had notes for the other 2 parts. We've looked at them. They're archived at the University of Buffalo, where she got her PhD, but you know, she was really trying to organize the material and hadn't quite solved that problem to write the rest of it.
Well, we really past time.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to adjourn for a moment, and certainly feel free to come up and talk with the panelists briefly, because they have something else on their agenda. And for those of you who will be students, who will be at the lunchtime workshop, could I meet with you in the back of the class? The rooms that is standardized, just very briefly, maybe 5 minutes. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.